beautiful piece of silk ribbon embroidery for the lid. So I've got an air erasable pen. I've drawn around the lid of my box so that I know what size I need to work within, and I'm just using the same air erasable pen to draw a circle roughly the size of the hydrangea head that I wish to sew. And now I'm just running some 13mm pure silk white embroidery ribbon from craftyattic.com through my mini straighteners, and I've threaded it onto a chenille needle. It's important when you're doing silk ribbon embroidery to use a chenille needle, because chenille needles have a nice sharp point at one end and a nice fat eye on the other. I've seen a few videos on YouTube where they tell you to use tapestry needles, which is madness, because tapestry needles have blunt ends and you will wreck the silk as you try and do your ribbon stitches. So I'm just now doing these ribbon stitches. I'll describe one for you. So what I'm doing is I'm doing these little petals in groups of 2. I'm starting about 10mm inside the circle, and I'm coming out to about 10mm outside the circle. So in order to do a ribbon stitch, you need to pass the ribbon back down through itself, which is why you need a chenille needle. So just bring the ribbon up, flatten it out as much as you can, leave a little bit of puff there, and pass the ribbon back through itself. And if you pull very gently, the ends of the ribbon will curl into a point. So I'm just doing these little these little petals in groups of 2, about 90° angle from each other. So I'm going to do these all the way around the edge of the circle. So I'm not going to make you watch that because that will be very dull. So I'm just going to crack on and do the rest of these here. So now I've done this first row, I've got some Pro Marker pens. They're Bluebell, Soft Lime and Orchid colours. They're permanent, so they won't bleed, it won't fade. They won't bleed into your backing fabric, but they will bleed into each other, so they do their own blending just beautifully. So all you need to do is touch your pen to the ribbon, allow the ribbon to soak up the pigment and allow the ribbon to blend the colours for you. The only thing you must make sure you do if you want these colours to blend is to do them while they're still wet, which is why I'm only working on 3 or 4 petals at a time. If I did the whole circle in the soft lime and then did the next colour, they wouldn't blend properly. So now I've coloured the first row of petals, you can start to see what a beautiful colour they're going to be. I'm going to just start doing the whole flower heads now. Now hydrangea is a collection of smaller little flower heads that are 4 petals arranged at 90° from each other. And I'm going to do exactly the same stitches, so it's a puffed ribbon stitch. So I'm going to perform those in exactly the same way as I did on the first round, except what I'm going to do is I'm going to aim to get these petals into the gaps left by the previous row, because hydrangea heads are quite dense. You can't really see through them, so I want that same dense packing of the little flower heads in my finished work. So I'm going to make sure that I always try and aim these petals into the blank spaces of the previous row. So they're just doing my 4th ribbon stitch. I've got my the same colours again, so I'm using the soft lime in the centre, I'm using the orchid pen in the middle of the petal, and I'm using the bluebell pen just towards the ends of the tips. Hydrangeas come in different colours, so you can use any colour combination you want really. They come in pinks and blues, hydrangeas, so you can mix it up a bit. So I'm just colouring each flower as I go, because the next row of flowers will go over the top, and then I won't be able to colour the petals once they're underneath something. So I've got some little purple beads now. This was a necklace I bought in a charity shop and cut up. So I'm going to sew one of these little stone beads in the centre of every complete flower here. And I'm going to just continue now to do my second complete flower head. Again in exactly the same way, using the same stitch as a puffed ribbon stitch, and I'm aiming these petals into the blank spaces left by the previous row. So now I'm just stitching another bead into the centre of the second little tiny flower head, just using a standard machine thread really. It's in a very pale pink. So I'm just going to continue now around in a circle in exactly the same way. You can see I've formed all of the little flower heads there, and I've tucked the petals as I've gone to cover the spaces in the previous row. I'm just going to continue now to do a second row of these complete flower heads in exactly the same way, still aiming the petals into the blank spaces or the gaps. So I'm using a velvet here. You can do silk ribbon embroidery on pretty much anything. You must use 100% pure silk though, and it has to be fine silk ribbon. If you don't, you won't be able to do this because the ribbon won't pull through the fabric and it won't pull through itself. Pure silk of very high fine quality is the only thing that you can do this with. So you can get bundles from craftyattic.com. We sell all different sizes there. We do bundles for starters as well. So I'm just continuing in exactly the same fashion, just dyeing these little flower heads as I go. If you wish to use silk dye, you can. You can get the primary colours of silk dye if you're only good at mixing colours. Just mix them up on a palette and paint them on with a brush. That's a technique that works equally well. It is a bit cheaper because you only have to buy 3 primary colours and then you're away if you're only good at mixing colour. Then all you do is, if you need to set this dye at all, you can use a heat gun on it. Obviously it says on the silk dye packets to iron set it, but you can't do that because you'd flatten it, so you can use a heat gun. So I've got one little gap here after I've finished my, well, I've got a 1/2 row and the 2 full rows of leaves there, and I've got this tiny gap which I'm going to fill with my last hydrangea bloom thing bit. I'm sure they have a technical name, these little tiny flowers that make up the whole, but I don't know what it is. So there I've got my last little flower head thing finished. I'm just going to then dye it in exactly the same way as I did the previous ones, and sew a little bead in as well. And that's the head of the hydrangea pretty much finished. Obviously you need to be fairly careful when you get to this stage that you only touch the petals you want to. You can pull the others out of the way so that you don't get the dye on the ones you don't want to get it on. So they're sewing the last bead in. Well, there's my hydrangea head finished. I'm just going to use the air erasable pen here just to draw on the stem and the leaves so that I know where I'm going. If you're not too confident with this, it doesn't really matter if you use an air erasable pen, all the lines will disappear anyway. So if you're not too confident, you can do it onto a piece of paper and then use the template to draw around when you're happy with what you have. So now I've got some 7mm. I'm just going to bring it up at the base of the stem and twist and twist and twist the 7mm silk ribbon until it forms the cylinder, a sort of stem shape. I'm then going to pass the ribbon back down through the fabric, and I'm just going to couch it down with just a standard machine thread. If you can find one with quite a high cotton content, use a mercerised cotton, something like that, rather than a polyester thread, as cottons and polyesters take up dye in different ways. So cotton is better because it's a natural fibre. So I'm just going to couch all the way up this stem. And now I'm going to do some little stems coming out from the main one to support the head of this hydrangea. I'm just going to couch that down in exactly the same way using the same thread. So now I'm finished the little stalks there. I've got a grass and a holly coloured pro marker here, and I'm just going to dot these about and just allow the colours to bleed into each other. I'm being careful not to touch anything like the backing with these pens because they're quite dark and I don't want to stain the backing fabric. I also don't want to touch any of the previous work that I've done either, so I'm being quite careful. So again, just allowing the silk to suck the pigment from the pen and let the silk do all the blending work for you. So now I've got another length of 7mm that I'm preparing with my mini straighteners. You can use an iron if you don't have any mini straighteners. Mini straighteners are very handy though. You can just keep them on while you're doing your work and use them when you want to. So I've just brought this up at the stem end of the leaf. I've done one big stitch down. I've come up at the base of the leaf and I'm now going to do a herringbone leaf here. So what you must make sure with this is that your ribbons are lying flat, so quite a bit of fiddling around really, making sure that the ribbon isn't twisting as you're doing it. So bring it up on the left hand side of the leaf, pass it under the right hand side of that stitch there, make sure that you've got the ribbon flat, and then take it over to the right side of the leaf and just pass the ribbon back down through the fabric. You want to leave about 5mm gap at the bottom where you're passing it back down through for each stitch there. So I'm just going to continue now in exactly the same way, working up the leaf. So a little bit of fiddling around, making sure that your ribbons aren't twisting on you, but it's worth it because these leaves look very effective when they're completed. So to help this these little ribbon stitches lay where they should, I'm just using a normal mercerized cotton, and I'm just placing a little stitch at the top of each of these little stitches here towards the ribbony bit in the middle that we wrapped the ribbon around, and that will form a kind of the vein in the middle of the leaf. It forms a raised bit of silk. So adds some dimension to the work, and it gives you a chance to just lay these ribbons exactly where you want them to be and to attach them there. Make sure they behave themselves. So all that's required is one stitch. If you want to, you can do the stitches at the edge of the ribbon just so you're doubly sure the ribbon's staying where you want it to be. So I'm just going to do that up and down both sides of the centre of this leaf. So I can pull these end ones around now until they're looking how I want them to. This one's got twisted over, so let's just sort that out. So I'm just going to go up and down both sides. So now my leaf is finished. I've got grass, holly and green pro markers. I'm using the grass, I think that's the grass in the middle. That's the green pen, and then holly's the darker one, which I'm just touching to the very tips of each of these ribbons. I'm just allowing the silk to do all the work, just let these colours blend together however they want to. It will take probably 2 or 3 minutes until they're fully blended, so just leave it alone when you first do it and just let it do its thing. You can fiddle around with it too much and you destroy the beautiful effects of the ink. I think you can see there as I'm working that the colours do take a little while to blend themselves and look as fully subtle as they will do when it's finished. So again, I'm working on only 3 or 4 ribbons at a time on each side because I want the pigment to be wet when I put the next colour on. I don't want any sharp edges, I want all the colours to blend into each other. So there's that one. I've done the other leaf while you're not looking. I'm just going to draw on now with my air erasable pen where I want my ivy to go. So I'm just being quite free about it, not worrying too much, filling in the gaps in this design so that it is a cohesive thing when it's finished. Just roughly marking where each little ivy leaf is going to go. And so these are erasable pens, you don't have to worry about them at all because they will just disappear. So now I've got some 7mm white silk embroidery ribbon. I'm going to make the stalks or the stems for this ivy branch in exactly the same way as I made the stem for the hydrangea. So I'm twisting the ribbon, I'm passing it back down through the fabric, and then I'm going to couch using a standard machine thread mercerized cotton. I'm going to stick a couple of little pins in this bit so that it's bent in the way that I want it to be bent before I attempt to sew it down. There we go. I'm just going to do all of the stems in exactly the same way as I've done that one. So now I'm going to show you how to do an ivy leaf. This is 13mm pure silk white embroidery ribbon. And I'm going to do one puffed ribbon stitch followed by another one next to it at about 90 degrees, a bit smaller than 90 degrees probably. So exactly the same way as we formed the little flower heads on the hydrangea this. Only now I'm going to bring one up from the centre, slightly behind those 2 stitches, and I'm going to do a 3rd ribbon stitch upwards again to form the 3 points on my ivy leaf. So I'm just going to do that in each place where I want an ivy leaf to be. While you're working with your ribbon, if you find that towards the end of the length of the ribbon it's got a bit creased from being passed through the fabric, you can just run your fabric straighteners up and down it again, and it'll be fine. Pure silk ribbon is very robust. It's a lot more robust than you would think. You can pass it through the fabric several times, and it really won't suffer at all. So there's my 2nd ivy leaf. So I've got here leaf green, soft green and grass green. So I think I'm using leaf green in the middle, grass green in the middle of the petals there, and I'm using the soft green on the tips. I'm also just touching the soft green into the other colours, and I don't know if you can see on the video, but the soft green will actually blend and push some of the darker colours out of the way, so you get a nice mottled effect as you do on variegated ivy leaves. If you like the look of these pens, you can order them through the website. Here's our finished ivy and hydrangea group, and I've just now stuck it onto my box. You can get all of the materials from craftyattic.com.